Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our morning coffee time for Thursday, June the 11th. So, how's everyone this morning? My setup is dukkha. It's unsatisfactory. I have the chat clear over here and the camera clear over here. So, and we have just about 70 of our friends here so far. Good morning, Sakula. Good to see you. All right. I see the sign. Image is good. Sound is good. If only it was that easy. Oh, and Alistair is here as well. I was commenting to Ajahn Kurudama the other morning. One of the things I find kind of inspiring about our little morning coffee thing here is that there's several couples sitting in on it together, sharing this time together. And that's nice because it seems like a lot of the Dhamma world is very much a solo activity for many people. And, I've found Kalyanamita and Sangha and community support just so instrumental in my own path of practice. And also when you think about internet, the technology of smartphones and ever-connected devices to the internet, it's a lot of people walking around looking at their black mirrors, I've commented before, absorbed in their own interests in their own little world. So it's always nice to see that there's several couples kind of tuning into this many mornings. So I have the Ajahns equivalent of writer's block this morning. So all morning I'm kind of on the watch for something that's alive in me and my Dhamma practice, and something maybe to comment on and share with you all. And it's a delicate thing. It's like you can't force creativity. If you feel a little anxious that you'll show up empty-minded, that just seems to produce another obstacle. You try to force it. It doesn't feel all that enjoyable or as useful as something that's a bit more spontaneous and inspired. So, and in some sense, it's akin to the way I relate to the experience of getting into this contemplative space that so much of our practice is, and so much of our efforts in our practice is there to support. And there is intention and there is effort and there is an act of will, an act of curiosity to explore and to understand and to question. But in some sense, it seems almost magical, or it's a delicate thing for all the conditions to kind of come together. And yet, in Dhamma practice, I've had this repeated sort of experience and sensation that somehow we get this, like there is wisdom in us. I guess there is delusion in us, but if that's all there was, the suffering would be so much more profound than this. So there is a great deal of wisdom in us. And I don't just mean as Dhamma practitioners, but as human beings. And many have commented on how striking it is sometimes that in our clearer states of mind, in lucidity, the profundity of things that maybe we've been in contact with our whole life finally reveals itself. It was a little while ago, I was listening to an interview that Sam Harris had with Jonathan Haidt. And towards the end of the interview, they were talking a bit about the use of psychedelics, and Jonathan Haidt, was talking about his experiences when he was younger using psychedelics. And he says something I've heard so often. Just like some of the most profound truths, like are very calm and pithy. Like you even find them in music and folk expressions and poetry and all kinds of sort of worldly places. But we're rarely are the conditions kind of ripe for us to really be impressed sufficiently by them or transformed by them or live from the wisdom that's, say, contained in that. And I find that's analogous and true to so much of the Dhamma. It's like on some level we do understand, but we can't actualize it, and we're not kind of living from that place because there are obstacles, there are hindrances, and certain conditions are kind of missing. And that's part of the reason why practice is just so important, and keeping up a steady effort at living a good life and developing the whole of the path, practicing generosity and virtue and mental cultivation and trying to watch over the mind and develop as many skillful conditions as possible, because it opens us up to the ability to sort of use and operationalize and be informed by whatever wisdom that it is that we do have. And I believe that most of us have a lot. But we are blinded by dukkha, obstructed by dukkha, as we say in our chanting. And it's not easy to live up to the promise of what I call our better selves. And so much of Dhamma practice is creating the conditions so that we can tap into that and live from that place, be informed by that, make wise choices. So, all right, well, we have just about 100 people, so I think everybody who wants to be here this morning is here. I saw some questions early on here. Let me scroll back through the chat stream. I see someone's got a new icon. That's good. Let's see. For images more. Hello, Bante, and hello, everyone. In practical terms, what is the difference between yoniso manasikara and samasati? Thank you. Well, samasati is I would say much more global. It's a much kind of bigger concept, and the canonical kind of resource for that is the Satipatthana Sutta. So samasati is applying the mind, framing our experience, applying effort to have conscious experiences that really support the process of awakening. And there's many, many ways that one can engage in that wouldn't necessarily be yoniso manasikara. So just attending to the breath in a very direct and wordless kind of way, with the intention of overcoming hindrances and purifying the mind. In some sense, I think of that as more fundamental, more basic. And that activity, if done for the right reasons, can accomplish sama sati, the seventh of the 8 factors of the Eightfold Path. So yoniso manasikara is, I think, more discrete, but it's the activity of the mind, or the activity of reflecting on the fundamentals that support the process of suffering and release from suffering. So reflection on the roots of suffering in particular, is maybe a way to kind of start to approach that concept. So yoni means the origin or the source, and then manasikara, like the activity of the mind. So like the mind directed towards the fundamentals of something or the roots of something. And one way to sort of approach that is like, it's like reflecting on like the origins of suffering. And the Buddha talks a lot about being a student of knowing suffering, knowing how it arises, how it is maintained, and how it ceases. So, and there's a lot of suttas where the Buddha is like encouraging us to kind of get down to the roots of suffering and really know how it is that kama tanha, bhava tanha, vibhava tanha, or sense desire, thirsting for sense experiences, and that dimension of experience, how that is a root for the experience of suffering, and how thirsting for being and becoming. So yonisiko manasikara is attention to the origins. So, nice question though. I don't think I've ever been asked that. Okay, and we have the ever-present talk of the weather, clouds and rains, and I said the most interesting feature of our weather here right now is it's unusually humid. So, okay. Good morning, Zuri. Ajahn, could you say a bit about eradicating lust or contracted mind? Is that an either-or question, Zuri? Can I talk either about eradicating lust or the contracted mind? Like I'm not exactly sure where the connection is in your mind around that. I can say a little bit about eradicating lust first, though, and that's a big project. One could say, like sense desire isn't, and our investment in finding completion and happiness in the sense realm isn't completely overcome until a pretty profound stage of enlightenment. But it said sort of with the attainment of stream entry, our relationship changes significantly in that dimension, because one has the experience, the wisdom, the insight, the realization of how ultimately that dimension of experience is dukkha, and how it can't bring us the satisfaction and happiness we oftentimes find ourselves seeking there, and then that attenuates our orientation and our relationship to that. So, but one has to build, I'd say, sort of other more durable forms of happiness, the kinds of happiness that the cultivation of the path develops to really free ourselves from that. Like we're on some level we're dependent on pleasure and happiness that one can find in sensuality. It's like you have to feed on something. And we're hungry for pleasure. We're hungry for comfort. We're hungry for a sense of delight. And, you know, that's a lot of where human beings look to feed those types of hunger. And so without something that's a bit more nourishing and other sources of happiness, it's hard to let go of that. So, and, applying ourselves to the practice helps. So like becoming a more selfless and generous person, like connecting more with the, the pleasure and joy of being a more ethical and virtuous person, and then the pleasure of developing the mind, uh, and even the delight in Dhamma and Dhamma practice. One substitutes, the Buddha talks about substituting sort of lower pleasures for higher pleasures. And so the things that we are developing and engaging in this path of practice should be leading us along some sort of hierarchy or up some sort of hierarchy and offering us higher quality, less blameless forms of happiness and pleasure, which allows us to relinquish that. And just like as we age, we lose interest in some of the things of childhood. They no longer seem all that interesting and delightful to us. So, and something that also feels that process is a regular kind of reflection about um, the deficit or the downsides of sensuality. So, and then contracted mind. I would say anything sort of connected with our failure to sort of develop the path leaves us with an experience which is described as contracted. Like, and it sits a little differently in the suttas, but I oftentimes think of the contraction of the self. Like if our habit of framing our experiences constantly sort of through the various forms of selfing and selfishness that comes along with that, that's a very narrow way to be in the world. It's a very contracted way to be in the world. And I guess maybe that some of the connection to sense desires, that's also very contracted kind of experience, because oftentimes it is a win-lose game. There's kind of contention and competition for sense pleasures. And also their sense pleasures are so fleeting and ephemeral. So they have a very fast, rapid time signature, and all of that leads to an experience that is very contracted compared to the more expansive sort of feelings that one develops through developing virtue and developing the path, and in particular the experience of samadhi, which feels just very spacious. The sense of time, even the physical sort of sense of the body and the mind sort of seems to sort of open up, and there's this broad, boundless experience in consciousness as we cultivate the higher mind. Can you explain the 5 precepts? As lay practitioners, are they taken daily or just at a retreat? Can we take them alone each day? So, there's various rituals where people take the precepts up with some sort of regularity, but maybe to answer hmm, the later questions here first, you can take them alone. You can determine them alone, and you could do so each day as a practice. Um, they're often given when you come into the presence of a monastic teacher, um, either for teaching or for ceremonies or a retreat. So I don't know. I don't know many examples of people that take them every day. Usually, there's some sort of periodic thing. So, like in Thailand, where I trained as a monk, many of the people that were active in the life of the monastery would come on the quarter phases of the moon for our Wanpra observance, and that'd be an opportunity to take the 8 precepts if you're staying for the day, and then oftentimes as that would end, then people would take the 5 precepts before going um, back home to their home life. So, um, and then oftentimes if they would invite the monks into their home for a blessing or a teaching, or say somebody was sick and they invited the monks to do some blessing chants and give a Dhamma talk or Dhamma reflection. The ceremonies would start with paying respects to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, the shrine, lighting candles and incense, offering flowers, and sometimes making offerings to the senior monk. And then the senior monk would um, lead them in taking the precepts. So they chant the refuges and precepts. So there's, in Thai culture and in other Buddhist cultures, there are some regular times and rituals where you're taking the precepts or reaffirming your precepts. And oftentimes, almost always, that happens in the presence of monks. But you can do that sort of anytime on your own. And even in the suttas, um, people are just declaring that they live by the 5 precepts. So the most important thing is that you live by them, not necessarily the ritual of taking them. So, and that they're there as a guide to inform how it is that the Buddha and also the wise kind of praise living your life, and also they're really skillful in protecting oneself from acting in ways that cause harm and lead to uh, a sense of remorse. But also they're wonderful teaching tools to help keep one sort of mindful and focused on the ethical dimension of our life, and in particular, sort of like the expression of greed, hatred, and delusion as those core defilements, or the tendency to those core defilements seek expression. They will push us to break the precepts. So, holding precepts, making a practice of holding precepts and reflecting on them on a regular basis, and trying to bring them into what it is that you're being mindful as you move through your day. Also is a mental training. It helps illuminate uh, the quality of your intentions. So, and without some matrix or without some boundaries or clear delineations, it's difficult to study something. And so the precepts also help us kind of study the expression of our own greed, our own forms of anger, ill will, hatred, and our own forms of delusion. So, and then the formulation of the 5 precepts is fairly simple. Refraining from taking the life of any living creature, refraining from taking that which is not given, which is a little more nuanced than not stealing. Um, Refraining from sexual misconduct, and I think the most straightforward way to talk about that is illicit sexual relations. So, uh, Some people extend that to sort of like harmful sexual relations and violating the kind of commitments that one has in that dimension of their life. And then right speech. So the biggie there is avoiding telling falsehoods or lying, but also refraining from harsh speech, divisive speech, idle speech, malicious tale-bearing. And then the fifth precept is around refraining from the use of intoxicants, which cloud judgment and dull the mind. So one point of confusion for some people new to the precepts is sometimes they wonder where all the positive qualities are. They look for more sort of nuance or something. And one of the things I like to reflect on is this is kind of a low bar, even though some of these are a little difficult, like especially right speech, but not taking the life intentionally of other living creatures. Most people don't find that so hard. The refinement of it, like not killing insects, becomes difficult. So, but and then sometimes people read into this a bit more. So sometimes you'll see certain explanations of the first precept of like, it's not like to really unpack that the intention that's behind that precept isn't just not to refrain from intentionally taking the life of other living creatures. It's to do no harm. Or I've even seen, it expanded a bit more where people are encouraging, like you should have a heart of loving kindness towards all living beings. And I think part of the folly in that is you take the precept and you turn it into something that becomes like you need to be a saint. You need to be very spiritually advanced to accomplish that. Whereas the basics of the 5 precepts is a bit of a low bar for human activity in the realm of virtue and ethics. And it's something that is quite doable if one applies oneself to it. And I think it's important. It's a stepping stone. It's part of this gradual path that we talk about. So. Kid Code. Good morning. Ajahn, could you talk a little bit about Silabhata Paramasa or self-delusion? Okay. Yes, Silabhata Paramasa, sometimes translated attachment to practices or attachment to rites and rituals, comes up most prominently sort of in connection with this model of the stages of awakening. There's 4 stages of awakening that you find in the suttas: the stream enter, or the sotapanna, the sakadagami, the anagami, and the arahant. And one way of fleshing out this 4-stage or 4-fold model to full enlightenment is a teaching on the 10 fetters. And 3 fetters are said to fall away with the attainment of the first stage of enlightenment. And one of them is this Silabhata Paramasa, attachment to rites and rituals or attachment to practices. And I think it's most easily sort of understood as like with the overturning, not the complete overturning, but a profound overturning of the self-view through a direct experience of enlightenment, but not full enlightenment. One sees through the delusion of the self-view, and I would say that the connection that that has to this whole mass of suffering and the habits of suffering. So there's still more that needs to be developed to completely overcome the delusion of self. But there's a profound overturning of that, or a breaking of that as a view that's held through the experience that gives rise to the first stage of enlightenment. And with that, attachment to practices or rites and rituals is said to be overcome, like that fetter, as well as skeptical doubt in the Buddhist teaching. And I think the best way to understand this is like one has a genuine sense of how self is empty, and the relationship to selfing and suffering. It recasts a lot of notions that people have in the world about what it is that is efficacious spiritual practice. So, it recasts what the value of various rites and rituals and notions of purification that exist, not just in Buddhism, but in other religions in particular. One sees, like, just by being virtuous or following a code of conduct does not necessarily address the problem of suffering effectively or fully. Or by bathing in a sacred river, or doing various rituals, or even just meditating. Meditation alone and some blind sort of attachment to the act of meditation isn't enough to overturn this delusion of the self and overturn the habits of suffering. So when one sees through that and has a transformational experience, then one understands. Another way I like to talk about it is like one crushes doubt, because one has, it's said that one has a taste of nibbana with that experience. So one confirms that this potential to completely overturn suffering exists. One sees through the delusion of the self and the self view, and one knows what is and isn't practice in some sense, because one sees the goal and one gets confirmation that the mind can change, and our understanding and wisdom can develop in a way that transforms our experience. And so one no longer is liable to be attached and to rites and rituals or practices, because one understands practice. And there's a phrase in the suttas, like, one becomes independent in the teacher's dispensation, or in the Buddha's dispensation, with the attainment of that. And why? It's like, well, because they've had a clear experience or glimpse of freedom from suffering, and they then know, maybe not all the details of what it is they need to do, but they know the correct path of practice, and they know that it's efficacious, and they can devote themselves wholeheartedly to that. So it wouldn't be a good translation, but you could say one overcomes mere faith or superstition, which is a lot of what guides many people's spiritual experiences. So, all right, well, we are past 8:30 now, so I'm going to leave it at that for today. I fell way behind in the chat here, but thank you all for bringing your questions this morning and help stimulating my wisdom faculty, or lack of it, my own sort of faculty of investigating the Dhamma and reflecting on Dhamma. So wish you all well. Have a good day, and hope you can join me again tomorrow morning for the coffee time. So be well, friends. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our morning coffee time for Wednesday, June the 10th. So, how's everyone this morning?